This is Bob Ferguson, and every Monday at 7 o'clock Central Time, we get together and we do Life with Bob. I may hold forth on topics of interest to me, or I may have wonderful guests come on. And tonight, we have one of those wonderful guests, my very good friend, Austin Frerick. Austin was an economist at Treasury, authored quite a few scholarly papers, was a tax policy expert. He decided that he would try to serve in another way and run for Congress, U.S. Congress, for Iowa's 3rd District. And through an extraordinary set of circumstances, I ended up being deeply involved with that campaign, which was really an amazing privilege. And then after that, you went to work at the Open Markets Institute and the whole issue of economic concentration. And now you are writing a book. So Austin, it is a great pleasure having you with me.
Yeah, I'm excited, Bob. Thanks for having me on.
So give us a little bit more deep background. I always like to ask people who I interview, how did they come to know what they know and believe what they believe? What's your background?
It's always a fun question to ask. Like, where do you start? Well, I'm a Cedar Rapids Bohemie. I don't know. This is a fascinating, it's one of those things where life is not linear, but it kind of all makes sense in retrospect. My whole thing is I love challenging corporate power. I think it's one of the issues of our time. I went to Grinnell College down the road from Cedar Rapids, and I did my undergrad thesis at Grinnell on Slaughterhouse Towns in Iowa, which is kind of ironic considering the campaign I ran. But yeah, I'm the oldest of three. My mom's one of 12. I'm a very, very Catholic family.
Very good. Okay. So how did you end up at Treasury?
It's funny you asked that. So I actually went to grad school at the University of Wisconsin thinking I would do poverty policy. I realized in grad school, University of Wisconsin, home to Wisconsin Ideal. I think a lot of the New Deal progressive legislation actually comes out of Wisconsin. I was at the poverty center there, and I realized that to do poverty policy, you have to actually do the tax code. Took tax law classes, yada, yada. Actually, my first job in DC then was, I was doing social policy at the Library of Congress. And I basically was recruited, got the job at Treasury because to find a young person who's really passionate about tax policy, my boss told me
that isn't a real common thing. A young person really interested and with a deep expertise in tax policy. But
because I mean, like, tax policy says so much about our value system. And I mean, I think we all can agree right now our current tax code doesn't reflect very poorly on us. It's fascinating. I mean, honestly, was doing tax policy is where I saw this concentration in the American economy, because when you go to the mall, you see all these different brands. There's that illusion of choice, but the tax data doesn't lie, and you see it right there on your computer.
So tell us about that, because you started to do research that showed an undue concentration of power. How did you discover that there was a concentration in the marketplace in things as disparate as dog food and eyeglasses and that kind of thing? And why is economic concentration such an issue that we should be paying attention to as citizens of the U.S.?
Yeah. Honestly, I was working on an academic paper at Treasury. It was super technical. There's a term, an econ term called super rents, which is just basically monopoly level profits. And it's one thing to see then pharmaceutical corporations. That's kind of the deal, is basically a patent is a monopoly. You have a monopoly on that drug for X amount of years because you put all that time in R&D. But then I started seeing it in food and agriculture. And like anyone can make a cracker. Like barriers to entry aren't that high to make a cracker. So why are some of these companies showing monopoly level profits in the tax data, which led me to Google and like, what's going on here? And that's kind of how I found antitrust. And there's this new movement where basically antitrust is small business protections, making sure American markets are competitive. That's been hijacked by radicals in the 80s. And we are in the midst, I'm so sorry about that fire engine.
Yeah, we'll just let let the fire engine go by.
Sorry. Um, yeah, so it led me down that rabbit hole. But it was also kind of, so you have that kind of awareness going on, but at the same point, I had a disillusionment with DC. Um, I like to compare DC to the capital city in Hunger Games. 5 of the 6 richest counties in America are DC suburbs. It is separating from the rest of America. I mean, there's a lot of towns in America's heartland across the country just aren't doing well. And DC is thriving because of that. And I like to joke that I was probably the only person at the U.S. Treasury to probably vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary. But like I always say there's a validity to the anger that Trump into, but Trump's going to blame the immigrant. I say blame Tyson's, because people are being shortchanged. They are being screwed right now. And I think challenging this corporate power is the issue of our time. That's how this all led to the campaign, was this anomaly in the data. Was like, wait, something's going on here, but also like, why is our city of government not responding to the needs of the people, and that disconnect because of all those lackeys that are I don't want to use the term swamp, but that are all in and around DC, the capturing of our government.
Okay, so let's tie him. I'm going to shut my phone off here, or shut that person off. So let's talk about a little bit deeper. What does monopoly power do in an economy? What are the consequences for our lives, our pocketbook? Particularly, all the people, the vast majority of people, are not at the top of large corporations. They're workers somewhere in the company. So what happens when unchecked monopoly power takes over, or just is allowed to happen? And we can even go into a little bit more deeply. How does this happen? How do we boil the frog like this? But first of all, what happens when you've got pockets of monopoly power, everywhere, like eyeglasses and dog food?
Yeah. I mean, concentrated power corrupts. I mean, with economic power comes political power that is then used to game the system. I mean, 2 examples that come to my mind on that right away is one, I mean, everyone talks about the Koch brothers, but here's a really good example of just how they use their economic power to corrupt the political system. There's a story in the New York Times about a year ago where they financed all this anti-mass transit campaigns across the country. A bunch of cities were saying, we want to build buses, build monorail, all that kind of stuff. What are Koch brothers? They're just oil barons. That's all they are. They just want to sell more oil. So basically, things that would stop selling more oil, they finance. And on the flip side, Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett actually has a mobile home empire that no one really knows about. He sells about 50% of all trailers in America. By the way, it's also his paint, his carpet. But that's not how he makes his money. He makes his money by financing them, because they're not a home. It's a different type of loan. And Dodd-Frank actually had protections in the bill for mobile homeowners that his entity, his economic empire, then unwound in the deregulation process. And that's the thing, is just something, that's power you and I don't have. So that's why you see the system increasingly favor those at top. So, not only does it, basically, first of all, you have lower wages. You cannot bargain with companies as big. You pay more for things. I mean, there's this great study where this whole theory of monopoly right now is basically big's okay because it leads to lower prices. But even when you look at the actual economic evidence afterwards, most prices go up. Turns out companies act like cartels when they have a cartel. Actually, bacon was cheaper in the 40s and 60s than it is today. Even though the meat industry is more concentrated now than when Sinclair wrote The Jungle. And then I think the 2 big things about monopoly power that I'm kind of realizing lately is, one, people just don't feel respected. They don't feel valued. Because when you have an owner that's no longer part of that community, they don't care. They don't do those symbolic things like holiday parties or paying for the nonprofits in town. I mean, that to me is what makes Fairfield, Iowa unique, is there is a strong, robust local business class that drives the community. And a lot of towns are missing that. There's a great paper by a young man from Keokuk, Iowa, It was his Harvard undergrad thesis where he looked at all the large employers in Keokuk, Iowa in the 60s and 2016 and compared. About half of them in 2016 were locally owned, and there was about 12 of them. Fast forward to 2016, none of them were, and there were only about 5. People, and you see it in the quotes of when he talks to people. I mean, ask anyone. No one says they really have a great employer anymore. If you look for this large faceless entity, because anymore these large conglomerates just view people as a number in an Excel sheet. And that really hurts the community. So not only is like lack of respect, higher costs, lower wages, it just your sense of your place, your community just kind of lingers, kind of stagnates almost.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's enough disadvantages to really think about that. Because if people have less economic power, and they personally don't feel respected, then I think it's human nature. If I don't feel respected, it's harder for me to pass respect onto another person, right? Because we are kind of how we feel inside. So let's talk about that. What happens to the social fabric as people make less money, feel powerless, feel not respected? Local communities really don't have the engagement that employers who live, the people who own the companies, like in Fairfield, most of the major employers there, the people actually live there. And so they shop at everybody's and they see people at Cafe Paradiso and they have to answer to them in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, wait, what's your question again, Bob?
Well, the question is, what happens to the social fabric? Because the macro fabric of our society is made up of the threads. And if something is chewing away the threads, it has to affect the whole, doesn't it?
And that's why I would argue is why we're dancing around fascism right now, or a tyrant. When people are backed into a corner, it brings out an ugly side of them. I mean, you spend time in these communities and you get the anger. You get, honestly, I wrote this article in American Conservative that a lot of my book is based on, where American food system's broken, but I think to revitalize rural America, we have to fix it, and that's how we get America's heartland to thrive again. And that's the hope. It's broken, but let's fix it, and it's a win-win for everybody. That article started off by, after the campaign last fall, I just spent like a long weekend down in Southeast Iowa, in Keokuk, Fort Madison, Burlington, Fort Muscatine.
Yeah.
And you spend time in these towns, you're like, they really resemble urban ghettos, urban impoverished areas, in a way that I don't think urban Americans appreciate, because you have to keep in mind, rural America interacts with urban America. They go to the mall, they go to the state fair. Urban America does not interact with rural America. They drive by it, bypass it, whatever. It's like the book Bowling Alone. I mean, what happens from what I've seen is, the plant closes. Maytag closes at noon. By the biggest example in Iowa, you can't sell your house
because no one wants to live there.
Yeah, there's no market, and first of all, what happens is no young families move in, and so you're stuck in your home. And so what you have to do is you have to go to another community to find a job. So most people in noon found a job in Grinnell or Des Moines. So then you drive an hour or half an hour, 45 minutes. So you probably are paid less. So you're working more for less. By the way, so you're doing all that. You probably saw the cases, get 2 slices of pizza in the pot, because it's been a hard day. Why not just have like some greasy cheese? I haven't got a way to say this, but like Iowa's now the 4th most obese state in the country. And I think that's rooted in a lot of this. It says a lot that the world's most productive farmland has the highest obesity about our food system right now. But what that means for the social fabric of your town is you've had a long day. That's the last thing you want to go do is socialize. You kind of go home, watch TV, relax, and you just kind of see that unwinding. By the way, the business class is gone, the drivers community are gone, the drivers that push activities in the town that help push for cool things downtown and art in the park, whatever it may be, are gone. And you just see that decay that sets in, and that it was honestly, for me, it was trying to get signatures in these small towns where I realized it was so much harder to get someone to open a door in a small town in Iowa than in urban Iowa. And that's completely that's counterintuitive to what the public, what most people think. Most people think of rural America as like, white picket fences kind of thing. And that's just not the reality anymore in a lot of these towns.
Yeah. Well, it really is so sobering. And I think, many people know me as a Shackley Senior Master Coordinator. I'm a business guy. Business is extremely important to me. The economy is extremely important to me. One of the reasons I decided I would do these conversations, even though some people may find some of the information a little hard to manage, hard to handle, but I decided I would have these conversations because it's so important for us as citizens to know what's the environment that we're operating in. And what are the forces that are operating outside of us that impact our lives? And you only have to see an example like Fairfield, where through a very highly anomalous situation, which is not easy to reproduce, we had an influx of people coming in. University came in, people from all over the world came in, people wanted to live there. A lot of people had never been in business. It was a bloody mess to begin with, as people tried to figure out how to do business. But 45 years on, we have a thriving business class.
Yep.
We have all kinds of robust, middle-sized, and some large employers. We have, I think, the seventh largest brokerage house, clearing house in the country. Go down Pleasant Plain Road, you don't know whether you're in Westchester, New York, or outside of Fairfield. 2 beautiful buildings and a lake and all that. Local people are there. And same thing with so many of the employers, and we grow businesses. But that, if you have an unvirtuous cycle happening, where you're having an economic hollowing out, plants closing and things leaving, and it's not just Iowa, it's all over,
Yeah.
but particularly the heartland, the Rust Belt, and particularly rural America, wherever rural America may be. And so you get this situation where people personally feel depression. They don't feel honored.
They feel lonely.
They feel lonely. And depressed, non-honored, lonely people, not everyone. I mean, there's obviously people in every community who somehow manage to rise, but as a whole. So this has a great deal to do with things that rattle up into national politics, right?
This wasn't. And what I always push back on, this wasn't natural. This happened as a series of policy choices that are reversible too. Because even though it's, quote, dark, there is hope to refix the system of, like, you see Iowa what it could be. Like, Iowa could be filled with a bunch of Fairfields. And we also are at a little moment where we have to change the structure. It's like, it doesn't make sense with climate change to get your green pepper from Argentina. I'm in the weeds of this right now because of the book, but truly radicals hijacked our small business protection in the 80s. A man named Robert Bork, most famous for actually being Nixon's hatchet man. This man, we're living under his theory of monopoly. And this guy's a bigot, homophobe, sexist, racist, you name it, he is it. Actually, the last paper he wrote was a paper financed by Google saying Google wasn't a monopoly.
Was not.
What?
Was or was not?
Oh, it was.
Was, okay.
Yeah, once a lackey, always a lackey, as I like to say. So you have that going on in the small business thing too. But then the agricultural side, we're living under a broken food model by Earl Butz, same kind of not a great guy. And his whole thing is like, our food system now caters to multinational corporations at the expense of family farms and people who work in food. The example I always use is Smithfield. You have the CEO of Smithfield, by the way, now owned by the Chinese state essentially, made $290 million last year. The average person in the slaughterhouse in Iowa has only seen a $3 wage increase, adjusted for inflation, in 30 years. And the farmer in the 80s, for every dollar you spend in the grocery store, they got 38 cents, now they get 15. All you're seeing there, and the price of bacon has gone up. So all you're seeing is the power.
Okay, wait a second. No, that can't be. Tell me that again. Tell me,
Yeah. So,
tell me that the farmer's getting less. Yep. Let's
yeah.
let's stop there and kind of rewind and talk about that, because that seems incredible to me.
It's the farmers getting less because they have less bargaining power. As Smithfield gets bigger and bigger, the workers earning basically less or hardly anything more because the company's getting bigger and bigger and they have less bargaining power. And companies broke unions, and then you're paying more. That's what I think is the funniest part, because the whole theory of this monopoly is you pay less. And that is just utterly false. It is false by its own metrics, yet we still use this theory. And it's comically insulting that the CEO gets paid $290 million.
Yeah.
So it just shows you all this from the farmer's pocket to the worker's pocket to the consumer's pocket. It's being drained into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And what that means for Iowa is there's less money in these communities, even though they are producing the most they've ever produced. That is truly a broken thing. And I think addressing that concentration of power, diffusing it, is how we put money back in these communities, part of that process. And that's a policy choice. That is a choice of how should power be concentrated?
So good. So we could go down a whole lot of rabbit holes. I was thinking of, like, who's Earl Butz and exactly what happened, or what happened in the 1980s when antitrust turned from being focused on creating enough diversification so you didn't have monopoly power, to flipped on its head, saying antitrust is all about efficiency. And so this concentration of power was supposed to create efficiency. And as I read it, and as I hear you, it didn't create efficiency. It created efficiency only for one entity. That is the very large multinationals who own the thing. It created tremendous inefficiency, less money, less power, less respect, less of everything, and higher prices, which means less money in their pocket for the common people, the people who actually make up the population, who live here, whose emotional states in the aggregate is us, who we are as a society, right?
Yep, and that is just the last key point is these companies aren't American. I mean, the outsourcing in the American food supply system is a national security issue at this point.
Tell us more about that. What is the deal with why? Well, it seems obvious, but let's go over it. Why is the ownership of so much of our productive capacity being outside not only concentrated and giving everyone a raw deal, but also is located outside of our borders?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I'm working on an article right now on that, because I think you hear it whispered, but no one wants to really talk about it. And I was giving the keynote at the Wisconsin Farmers Union Convention earlier this year. And I just kind of said it offhand because I'm borderline obsession with Smithfield and understanding this company. The reaction to all these dairy farmers, I had people standing up and clapping, because there's that anger that just is not, it's the corruption of the political system, all the campaign money that's truly stopping a conversation on this from happening. I mean, you have 2 of the 4 meat packers now are foreign owned. Smithfield's owned by WH, a Chinese company. JBS, the largest slaughtering company in America, which, by the way, wasn't even America about 10 years ago. They just bought a bunch of stuff. And there's been a ton of corruption scandals in Brazil with it. Is the other one. You have, I think, the seed industry, 3 companies have like 60% global market share on seeds. 2 of the 3 are foreign owned. You kind of go even baby food. 2 of the 3 largest baby food, again, another 50, 60, 70% market share owned by foreign corporations. That makes me uncomfortable, the extent of that foreign ownership. And then there was a big story in NPR last week, and a lot of foreign land now is becoming owned by foreign entities. I mean, thank God. Thankfully, Iowa has a rule in the books where it doesn't allow foreign entities to buy land. But you go to South down to Missouri, and Smithfield owns, I think it's like 80,000 acres.
Right. So I think we have, adequately scratched the very surface of a very, very huge interlocking set of issues and problems. The bottom line of which is that people have less power, less money, they're less secure. There's, particularly in rural America, there's less community cohesion because of that economic degradation and the hollowing out. So, Austin, I warned you this before we talked. I was going to ask you, if you were king, which I think I might even attend your coronation if you were, but if you were king and you were setting up, seriously, if you were setting up a system, what does, given all of the complexity, and when you haven't even talked about the whole issue of a fossil fuel-based economy and climate change, which is barreling down the pike. People think that it's going to be somewhere in the future. That's right now. I mean, just ask people in Western Iowa where towns are being completely devastated, and many other areas in the world where we in the US don't see, which are in much, much worse shape. All kinds of stuff happening in the face of all of these onslaughts. What should we as thinking citizens, as citizens who want the best for us, our community, our children, our friends, our families, what do we want to do? Let's just take Iowa as a microcosm, since you're an Iowan, I'm an Iowan. How do we fix the thing? What do we do what policy things do we do to shift and make this thing work?
Yeah, I mean, J.D. Slaughton, the man who ran against Steve King and almost beat him, knock on wood, runs again. I was on the stump with him one time, and he got asked the first thing he would do, elected to Congress, if he was, had a magic wand, and he said campaign finance reform. And I remember thinking about that 2 years ago. It's like, I'm not sure that'd be my first answer. But the more and more I think about it, I agree with him. I mean, we know these answers. We know most Americans believe in climate change. Most Americans believe in paid leave. Why is Al Gore making that same movie 10 years later? It's because the money sloshing around the system. To run a Senate race last cycle in 2018 cost about $100 million. The Florida race alone cost $220 million. You have these two-term seats for Congress costing, I think the California seats were like 20, 30 million. I mean, the one I was running in was a $15 million race for 2 terms. And so that's what's scary is, imagine, let's say you win and on a trust-busting message, that monopoly money is going to come after you every year, and eventually they're going to win. I mean, they're going to beat you. I mean, you can't. That's why campaign finance is so important, because it just tips the scale so much. And it's you give me an FEC report, and I can tell you everything about a candidate. Because I mean, if you're taking corporate money, you will not bite the hand that feeds you.
Yep.
So that said, I mean, that is number one in my book. But what's so clear in agriculture, the more and more I learn about it, is there's not a vision. Like, especially the Democrat Party, there's not a vision for what the Farm Bill should be. Democrats have almost conceded that to Republicans. They're like, I think part of it is they're such an urban party, they've lost what should the Farm Bill be. And there's a lot of really big things you could do to change the system in a really meaningful way. Simple things as not letting companies that slaughter animals own the animal. I mean, the largest owner of pigs in America is Smithfield. And to little things like, let's bring back home economics. I think Alice Wilder's Edible Schoolyard is just updated home economics. And that's what Extension could do. Imagine if all these elementary schools in Iowa had little farms on them. Extension worked with local farmers, brought in took kids to Francis Dickey's milk, cows, and like the kids got to milk a cow and make cheese or whatever. Like, that's cool. That's also a life skill that kids need. And it's a way to take concepts of math and all that stuff and apply it experimentally. That's how kids learn, not by memorization. That's policy things like that, I think, are huge and would go really far. I only bring that one up because I'm on the campaign. I saw one of these, actually in Hamburg, Iowa. It was one of those towns that unfortunately got flooded down in the very, very southwest corner of Iowa. Did one of these on its own. and just the joy it brought kids. I'm just thinking to myself, like 8-year-old me would love to play with a piggy.
Well,
Um,
Austin, it's so fascinating that you would say that because, some people also know me in my role as executive director of the Sustainable Living Coalition. We have 12 acres there. We have the Eco Barn, and you have been there and spoken there, and it's a great place. And we've had a vision, the board has had a vision of turning that into something really productive. Well, we discovered Ray Mailer, who is a veteran, works with veteran organizations, physician, and got an accident and couldn't do that anymore. And so he decided to do something easier, which is to go buy farmland, regenerate it, sell it at a profit, and keep the thing going so that he could demonstrate how to actually turn unproductive farmland that had been abused and decarbonized and all that into productive farmland and also mitigate water. So he's created a 10-acre water mitigation farm that mitigates the water quality off about 400 acres. He has created an award-winning STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math program for the Ankeny schools. By far and away, the most popular field trip, the kids coming to his farm and looking at all how the systems and, harvesting sweet potatoes with their hands from ground that had, 6 inches of powder and hard pan like sandstone on it 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so there are actual local solutions like that that regenerate the ground, sequester carbon, and start creating a system of microsystems that can be put together to actually take on the larger system. So let's talk about that. How do you stick together a bunch of these small local systems to take on the Smithfield and the kind of the existing isness of agribusiness?
I mean, this is what gives me hope. Like 2 things on that right away into my head is, one, there's a lot of people I know that love to be a farmer. Like there's a thing about working with your hand. Like some people just don't want to work in a cubicle, work in an office. They want to be their own boss. But right now in this model, they can't do it. I'm working on a new article right now that basically, what really concerns me in Iowa right now is cars are moving to batteries. One of the premier ethanol scholars in the country at the University of Illinois was quoted last week saying we've hit peak ethanol. Ethanol, the single largest use of corn in Iowa and in the US is ethanol at 40%. What are we going to do with that? And I should also say, by the way, this idea is not mine. This is something Colin kind of, we worked together a farm earlier this year, and a lot of that involved us bantering a lot together. And he kept pitching me on this. I didn't fully get it until I kind of connected the dots. So like ethanol, that the conversation over that bridge is going is part of it. This model of like CAFOs, like I'm shocked how many, even in Iowa, how many urban Iowans don't understand how so much of our protein is made in these metal factories where the animal never sees the light of day. It just eats corn and defecates into these ponds below that destroy our environment. Which, by the way, pig CAFOs alone in Iowa produce as much waste as 65 million people, which is California and Texas. I think it's incredibly lightly regulated. Some might say Iowa's become a Chinese toilet. I didn't say that. Because what it's doing to our waterways, as we saw in northern Iowa earlier this year with heavy rains, a lot of these hog lagoons overflowed into the creek. We would never treat human waste like this. I don't know why we're treating pig waste that way. Anyways, I say all this because I think Iowa needs more pig farmers. We need to take animals out of these metal sheds, put them on the land, because there's only so many pigs that one human being can raise. So that way, someone graduates from Ankeny High School in suburban Des Moines, and they're like, I want to be a farmer. They can then go, and the barriers to entry are low enough where they can buy the farmland, buy enough pigs, and be a pig farmer. By the way, it's better for the environment. You just anyone tours Francis Dickey's dairy farm outside of Fairfield, and you just see it. By the way, I still have not had milk better than his milk. It's like one of my top 3 favorite things about visiting Fairfield because it's like borderline orange.
Hey, listen, I have friends in Chicago. When I go visit them, the barrier of entry to their home is 2 gallons of Francis milk, right?
It's like, I can tell you right now, in Fairfield, I drink Francis's milk. I go to that really cool like burger joint, cider place, you know. You just walk around downtown. Like, it has a thriving downtown. I say all that because pasture-based livestock, I think, is the future for Iowa agriculture. Plus, if you have, you take these foreign-owned pig factories and instead have 10 family farms, rural communities are healthier.
No, because you have people.
You have people. I mean, that's half of it is, I mean, to me, this is such a win-win-win-win-win times 10. It's more about, can we challenge the vested interest of the status quo? And I think it says, that's going to be our challenges. We know what the future needs to be, and the science clearly is on our side. So it's just like, how do we get to that? How do we get to the promised land where a kid in suburban Des Moines can be a pig farmer?
Yeah. And that is the barest scratch and the surface again of topics that we can spend a lot of time on. In fact, we're going to spend a lot of time on it. We're going to have on the 1st of July, we're going to have John Eichard, who is one of the most celebrated agricultural economists in the world from the University of Missouri, retired many years ago, lives in Fairfield because of what's going on in Fairfield. And he'll talk about alternative economic models that could really work for the whole country. Feed everyone, remediate the soil, take care of groundwater pollution. But all of that stuff is kind of like, there was a 7,500 head CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, planned or actually probably in west and north of Fairfield. That CAFO makes as much waste as a town of 45,000, and it doesn't actually have an active sewer system. You would never make a town for 45,000 people without a sewer system. Now, it's not just going out in the land, it's the lagoon, but what happens when it rains? What happens when the lagoon leaks? What happens with all of those toxic chemicals, volatilizing in the air and, creating havoc for people around? So there is a much, much better way to do it from a nutritional standpoint, from a ground standpoint, from a social standpoint, from an economic standpoint. But it is an issue of people being actually aware of this. And that's one of the reasons I do these conversations.
Yeah, I would just say too, I just was at the Iowa premiere of the movie Johnson, Right to Harm.
Right, yes.
Incredible movie. Produced by Mark Bittman, formerly of the New York Times, where it describes CAFO in the best way I've ever seen done, and the harms from that model. This is what happens when you totally dehumanize the process, and when you allow your food system to be about what is best for a few people and not what's best for the whole structure, the whole system. And John does a great job of explaining his evolution on how he used to be part of the problem and now how his eyes got awoken to it and what we need to do.
So that's the issue. That's a set of issues that, the agricultural issue is really, the same mechanics there are in other areas of monopoly concentration. The same issue, same kinds of issues, maybe different solutions, but the same kinds of issues. But let's zoom up before we finish up kind of to the national level. You were at Treasury when the last tax bill came through. You were among a group of analysts who did something pretty gutsy. And I think, rather than getting into kind of a political tug of war, which I really, as people who know me, I don't really shy away from, if it's illuminating, if it can illuminate what's happening. There's many people say, well, the economy now is just humming along. We're doing great here and great there. And so I guess the issue is, how are we to evaluate a national economy in terms of its stability, in terms of the total costs, environmental and otherwise, which are going to, redound back to us? Talk to us about your feelings. If you were looking at the national economy, national tax policy, all of that, first of all, what did you find at Treasury? And then what would you do differently, again, if you were running economic policy for the US? I know that's a big question, and we only have 15 minutes, but let's take it on.
I mean, for tax policy, what scares me the most right now is the collapse of the corporate tax base. So much of that money from these monopolies, not only are they screwing you, pardon my French, but then they're hiding that money offshore. So that means you are picking up more and more of the burden for your schools, your roads, healthcare, all that kind of stuff. Including not even just corporations, I should say, it's also the super rich. And what scares me the most, honestly, about this moment is sometimes I feel like we're living in 1927. We're on a sugar high. What that tax bill, and there was a great Library of Congress report that came out last week just saying Republicans promised this bill would pay for itself. That was an utter lie, and they knew it, that this would create jobs. It really didn't. Just everything they said about it was false. It was just a giveaway to their donors. And we've never seen a late market stimulus. Like, there's a natural ebb and flow to an economy. We're on one of the largest period of economic growth in U.S. history, I believe. And then we throw much more debt into the system. I mean, there's so much debt sloshing around the world, from corporate debt to there's a lot of debt in China that no one really understands, to student loan debt. And it's not like people are doing better either. It's not like, there's that great stat where it's like a large majority of Americans couldn't afford a $400 emergency bill. And then on top of it, just what I've seen at Treasury is just a hollowing out of bureaucracies and science and expertise under the Trump administration. The conscious defanging of it by these lackeys that he's appointed to these different things. That's scary. I mean, it's just so scary. And then the rhetoric he's using with China, Mexico, all of these corporations, it can quickly escalate. I mean, not even just let's just say it doesn't even escalate. When you threaten China with soybeans and when they're dependent on you for large imports of their protein, they're not going to be dependent on you if you have that language. They are going to put money into other systems. They're going to industrialize Argentina, Chile, all that kind of stuff. And so you're going to already flood the market. I don't know. You just know a storm's brewing, and there's no one really to take. There's not like someone to take charge. You know what I mean? There's not any like meteorologists in the lookout, I should say.
Okay, so that's a situation that we have. So if you were going to do something different, we have to have mental models of how would we do it different? How would we do it different? It's not any given administration. It's the role of history from many, many, many years. So we're in a predicament right now. We're in a pickle right now, even though it looks like the economy is kind of humming along and all that. So what would we do differently? How would we think about this in terms of real economic principles that we can understand inside of ourselves and express, in our political, in the decisions we make about who we choose to represent us?
I would say the two biggest ones that come to my head are, campaign finance reform, because all this we just talked about is a byproduct of a system that is captured by robber barons that is just reinforcing their bottom line. Because they'll be fine when the recession comes, or if things fall apart. We're the ones that are going to feel the pain. Our retirements are the ones that's going to feel the pain. Our jobs. I mean, that's what's scary for me is you have all these corporations with a lot of debt. And when those chickens come home to roost, there's going to be massive, massive layoffs. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a bunch of JCPenney's close, go out of business, all that kind of stuff, and what that means for people. But what we can do, and I think too, it's I think progressives need to make a really big push to go after all these tax cheats. I mean, the IRS has been systematically defunded. I think there's been great reporting how it spends more time and resources going after poor people and their tax issues than the super rich. I mean, that is just, I don't know, I want to say effed up. I think for a progressive agenda, you gotta, right away, the second Republicans lose power, they're going to say, debt, know that's coming, and prepare for it, and say, and I admire Senator Elizabeth Warren saying, I want to do this, and this is how I'm going to pay for it. A lot of people view the government as a checkbook. And I think that is something progressives need to also remember. So those are kind of the two things I would focus on, Bob.
What can we do individually and what can we do in our communities faced with this issues?
Yeah, I would say in your local community is in these times, treat donating to politicians you support like charity. So figure out who's running for your state rep seat, your most local races, and get involved. Put a yard sign up. One of the easiest things you can do. It's free advertisement for that campaign. And what you are telling your neighbors in your neighborhood is, I validate this candidate. It's the cheapest $4 any campaign, $5 any campaign spends. And cut them a check, help them pay for those signs. And also make sure someone's running in your seat. Even if you think you live in the super R or D seat, or super R seat, if you and your friends just get out and you're able to get an extra 300 votes out that wouldn't otherwise be brought out, you might help someone above you get in. And it's having that mentality of a rising tide lifts all boats, where, I mean, we didn't win, Bob, but I think we kind of won. I mean, Bernie, Warren, they're all talking about Bernie copied our campaign ad the other day. I was going to actually tweet, send me a royalty check. It's the same farmer too in Iowa, by the way. I thought that was funny. I mean, yeah. I've had the fortune and opportunity to advise a lot of presidential candidates on their plan. And that is, I don't know, if you decide to step up for public office, regardless if you win or lose, what agenda are you pushing? And I thought our campaign pushed a really bold agenda that a lot of people are now seeing just have the merit of the power of it.
Well, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So we take care of finance reform. We get the money out, because that, it seems to me, is the source of all the issues. Because if gigantic pools of money don't have their thumb on the scales, I personally have quite a lot of faith in the average intelligence and the average judgment. And so if you look at a lot of the issues that we deal with, the majority of people are for things that just make sense. But the policies don't get put in place because of the undue influence of corrupting influence of money. So I think that's a big deal. And the other thing that I think is that go work on making your community vibrant, because Fairfield is vibrant as an example, because our mayor, Ed Malloy, he says his favorite expression about Fairfield is the city of 1,000 passions. You can't possibly keep track of everything that's happening in the city because there's too many things that are happening. But because we're used to doing that, someone has a bright idea, and rather than people kind of sticking their hat pin into someone else's bright idea, they're more likely to say, wow, that's a really cool thing. Can I play too? And so you get this kind of virtuous cycle coming up. And I think we are impacted by these macro policies. We are impacted by policies that are bought and paid for. But we don't necessarily have to just stand by as a passive victim of these policies. We can, in our own communities, and therefore in our own regions, start creating something. If we don't want this, create this. And so I think that's a message that I would leave with many of the people who are going to be, who are listening tonight and going to be listening, regardless of one's politics, right, left, middle, whatever. Everyone, I have a lot of friends who are very different political persuasion than me. When we get together and we talk about things, particularly local things, 95% we agree on. So you go find people. We go find people, regardless of their political views, that you can focus on doing something wonderful in your area. And that's another one of our tricks in Fairfield, is we decide what we want to do. Well, we're going to have a 16-mile loop trail around the whole town. We're going to build a $9 million performing arts center that Stephen Sondheim gave the naming rights to before New York. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then people of all kinds and stripes, they believe this, that, and everything else, but they get together and they decide, this is what we want to do. We raise the money, we raise the energy, and it happens. And you can create a place, again, regardless of the big macro problems that we're dealing with, you can help create a place that people really want to live in. And to me, it's like the body. The body isn't any healthier than themselves, right? If each one of us in our area starts working on improving the health, even devastated areas can start to come back. It's just ideas, right?
Positive energy compounds itself.
Right. Entrepreneurship. So anyway, Austin, thank you very much. This has really
Thank
been
you so much.
an incredibly enlightening, amazingly enlightening time. And, you know, we've barely scratched the surface, and I'm sure that there are people who are listening who are thrilled with what we said. There are people who are listening who may not be thrilled with what we said. But I think it's all of these ideas, particularly the concentration of economic power and the harm that that does. And the reason for that concentration of economic power is campaign finance. If it costs $220 million to run for a Senate seat, who's got that kind of dough? So you got to have with the money, right?
I just want, on a final note, I mean, that's what you talk about your friends with different parties. That's all about this message. Everyone kind of agrees with it. You start talking about monopoly, left, right, you name it. People like it. People agree with it. People feel it. I also just want to say thank you because you, on the campaign, you arranged a tour of Fairfield for me that one day. I saw a lot of small business, and that's been a very formative thing for me. From a young woman who makes kombucha in the back of another small business who does tiling, to the company, like all this is like, it's such. This is what it could be. Iowa could be full of, and that's the thing. It's a philosophy of let's throw 50 darts. You don't know which one will stick, but one's going to stick. And the can-do attitude is just, it's such a, we can do better. And people want that people crave that hope and optimism right now. There's a dark cloud over our culture, and I think people just want to move on.
Well, and we can, whatever the weather is outside, we can individually take on the mantle of creating what we want and find other people in our areas who are willing to make common cause. And you know, the interesting thing is when you're working on a project, no one worries about the differences, right? You're so hammered down on creating the project, and it's such a joy when the project happens. That's what draws communities together. We're always diverse. There's always two sides of everything. No one political party has all the answers. No ideology has all the answers. But I think my experience is the answers come when people come together and each individual takes their individual responsibility for being creative and moving forward something that they're passionate about in their heart.
Yep, you see the empathy in the other people. I inherently, to my core, believe most people are good people. They want to do the right thing. I think that's what gives me a lot of hope at this moment is we've been here before. And it's usually in the darkest times of American history when the biggest step forwards occur. Now it's up for us to seize it.
There we go. Austin, thank you very much. Everyone out there in Facebook land and Zoom land later on, thank you very much. And we are going to finish this live, but Austin, we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone can message me too.
Yeah, bye-bye, all.